Right. So a little about me. Um, this photo is taken by Scott Rokas. You'll hear more about him later on, but just a little shout out there. Um, I am an adventure photographer and also an ultra runner. And I thought I'd kind of start with how I got into this because it's a little bit of a niche world. And I kind of stumbled in here. I was an ultra runner for like 5 or 6 years. I worked in a corporate job. I worked for ICBC, 9 to 5. And as I was out in these amazing places and exploring like crazy areas in the mountains, as I'm sure you all appreciate, your phone just doesn't quite do it justice. So I got a DSLR and I started teaching myself how to take photos. And it was at first just a fun little hobby and kind of a fun way to learn something new. And then as I got a little bit better at it, I'd bring my camera with me everywhere. And like all my friends can attest to the fact that I was constantly running with it and constantly using them as my guinea pigs. So I am sorry about that. Anyways, as I got better, I started to kind of put my content out there and brands started to get in touch with me. And the thing that I heard the most, which I found really interesting, was that there wasn't that many female photographers that were kind of in this extreme sport world. And a lot of brands really wanted to have a more representative like group of people that they worked with, but they just struggled to find female photographers that could keep up to some of the stuff. And I mean, it's interesting because even in the world of ultra running, like it generally trends towards more men and races than women. So it kind of makes sense that within the niche of, ultra running photography or something like that, there'd be even less women involved. So I kind of saw it as an opportunity and thought to myself, well, where can I take this? And I was still working my 9 to 5 job and started picking up these kind of side jobs and traveling a lot. And it just got ridiculous. Like I was rationing out my holidays so that I could leave the office at 5 o'clock on Friday and then literally get in the door at 9 o'clock on Monday morning and probably not showered and not slept since Friday. There was like a couple times where I was traveling like, to Europe. I think I went to Europe once on a long weekend just to like fit in a cool trip that came up. So anyways, I got to the point where it was like, well, I can do this. Like, I just have to commit to it and kind of pull out the security blanket. And I quit my corporate job and I went back to school. I kind of debated that because I thought, well, I'm already, getting business and stuff. Do I really need to go back to school and invest that time and money there? But what I wanted to do was to build out a skill set that kind of separated me from anyone that could just pick up a camera, which is what I'd done. So I went back for graphic design, and that's ended up being a big part of what I do. And it's really kind of allowed me to level up and to take the photos that I'm taking and then really make them into like marketing tools or make them into stories. So I'm really, really glad that I did that and that I took that time. And at the time it felt scary because I thought, well, what if I lose all these connections and I lose like all these opportunities that have been given to me? Because it seems like I'm just on a roll and here I am being like, no, pause that for a year. I'm just going to go back to school. But yeah, in hindsight, I'm really, really glad I did that. And I kind of set myself up to have a good base. So that's kind of how I ended up going down this path. And then as I graduated school, a friend of mine that I'd met on a trip to Kenya during that whole period of time when I was still trying to do the corporate job and also fit in these trips, he reached out to me. He said he was putting together a team of people to go to Nepal. And it was the week after I finished my school program. And I thought, wow, I've never been anywhere in Asia. I've never been anywhere near the Himalayas. Like the highest I'd ever climbed was the Grand Tetons, which is like 14,000 feet. And he's talking about going to 20,000 feet and staying there for a few weeks. And I was like, oh, yeah, that sounds like a bad idea. Sure, why not? That's where all good ideas begin, right? So anyways, the week after school ended, I hopped on a plane and I went to Nepal. That was a fun photo from like a 3 a.m. start. You can't see the fact that it was so cold. My hands were like frozen. But that whole trip was this crazy adventure. And one of the things that came out of it was this really cool feature piece in Mountain Life magazine, which if you live around here, you definitely know Mountain Life. They do these beautiful, like 4 issues a year, gorgeous spreads and stories. And I was able to kind of tell the story of this trip that I'd been on. And it was a really interesting trip. Just like a short little synopsis of it was we went up into the Everest area. You can see on the map there, you can see it where we were. And we decided to tag a bunch of the peaks that were just at 20,000 feet, because that's the height at which you need a permit. So we were like, we'll just stop at permit level. And it turns out there's a lot of amazing stuff in the Khumbu region that never gets climbed because people are so focused on the big stuff. So it was actually this really kind of mind-blowing trip for me, really, really transformative. And we spent like 3 weeks just trekking through the mountains with no cell phone coverage. And I had a lot of time to think about like where I was going, you know, like I just finished school. Where is this going to take me? Am I just going to get a corporate job again, but in a different field? Or am I really going to take this opportunity and try to create something that's mine? So that's kind of what I did. And this feature article was like a very big boost of confidence and really showed me that I could create something very unorthodox and maybe combine the passion for photography with traveling and kind of use these opportunities, work with brands, work with magazines to go on some of these trips that I'd always dreamed of doing. And I would say that it really kind of solidified that I was heading in the right direction. And from there, it was just like, well, what other ideas can I dream up? And like, how can I really take this momentum and kind of build these connections that I have and go from here. So I decided that the next year I would go back to Nepal. I did a lot of traveling in between, but nothing really big. But I had it in my mind that I wanted to go back, but I wanted to be the one that pulled the trip together. And I wanted to work with brands. I wanted to pitch it. I wanted to get the funding. And it was important to me to feel like I could really own a trip, like on a bigger scale. So we had three people from North America, and then we had at one point, there was a team of 10 of us, actually, because I had a lot of friends in Kathmandu who ended up joining us for sections of the trip. And I had the idea that we would go into the Upper Mustang area. And the Upper Mustang is just like this incredible, like lost area. It used to be part of Tibet. And then when China took over Tibet from Nepal, Upper Mustang stayed with Nepal. And it's very remote. Up to like 15 years ago, there was no tourist access at all. And I only heard of it because I saw these photos from this really remote ultra running race that was held up there. There was like 25 people or something like that. And it looked like Mars, like it was just insane. And I thought to myself, like, where is that? Like, that would be a really cool place to go and explore. And it just didn't seem like the typical Himalayas story that you see. And I thought, that's a really interesting area to take people to and to check out. So that's where we headed. This was a tiny little town about 30 miles from the Chinese border. And it was like 3 weeks of trekking to get here. We were staying in little places where they didn't even have hostels. Like it was just so off the tourist beaten path. And you had to have a mandatory guide with you. No one in the villages spoke Nepalese even. So we would have a guide to translate with someone else from the village to their dialect so that we could communicate. But we ended up like staying in people's houses and sharing meals with them. And we got invited to these beautiful Buddhist ceremonies. And I was really impacted just by how warm and accepting people were. And so that was like, I would say that was kind of like the next level of really seeing where I wanted to take my career was this trip, because I pulled it together myself. I pulled together all the funding, and we ended up in this just beautiful place that people don't go to. And I wouldn't have gone to it if I hadn't put that time and effort into, like, you know, literally researching and funding and doing all these things to make it happen. These photos right here, I thought I'd show just because they represented another step forward in my own photography where I really started to interact with people more. And it's really easy as a photographer to hide behind your lens and to not really kind of engage with people or to be afraid of their reaction. Like, you're always afraid that if you go up to someone on the street and they tell you like they don't want their photo taken, it feels a little bit like a stinging rejection, you know, even though it shouldn't, but there's something about it. And on this trip, I decided that I was going to put that aside, and I was just going to go up to people and I was going to ask them if I could take their photo. And I was amazed, like 9 times out of 10, people were really receptive and people would really open up to me. So I was able to capture some beautiful moments. The one at the top right there with the lady eating her lunch, she was like in this tiny little cobblestone street, and I came around a corner and I literally just stopped in my tracks because she was sitting in this patch of sunlight. It was like a sunbeam just shining right down on her. And she looked so peaceful. So I went up to her and asked her if I could take her photo, and I was using my best sign language and everything. And she smiled and nodded, and then she just like folded her hands and kind of stared at me. And it was like one of those moments where I just didn't even want to breathe. It was really, really special. So things like this kind of really showed me like I was going in the right direction, but I also wanted to take the time to research the places I was going, to tell stories, to meet people, because really, I mean, mountains are beautiful, but it's more the people that you meet along the way that have an impact on you. And then if I could do that in a way where I could get brands to get on board with my vision and help me tell those stories, then I mean, all of a sudden I had a viable way to do this stuff, because I certainly couldn't afford it on my own as a self-employed freelancer. So yeah, it was just kind of came together, and all these little things affirmed that I was going in the right direction. This trip was cool too. Arc'teryx was our biggest sponsor on this trip, and they sent us with a bunch of gear, and we took photos for them of their product along the way. And it was interesting to be able to integrate that stuff into a trip, but not have it take over the trip. Like, we're still able to fully immerse ourselves in it, and then you just kind of have a day or two along the way where it's like, okay, now we're gonna do our photos and get that done, and then off we go again. So yeah, it was a cool balance of work and play. There's a couple more photos. I absolutely love the one of the little monks on the left there. They're so cute. And then the one on the right was a cool morning. We started from the village below at like 4 o'clock in the morning to catch sunrise. But we actually missed sunrise because it was a lot further than we thought it was. And when we got to the lake, it's usually very windy up there, and it just happened to be calm for like 15 minutes. And we got this incredible reflection of Annapurna, that's Annapurna in the background. And I got Haley to go run through there, which I think she hated me for, because we were at like 16,000 feet. She's like, run? What do you mean run? But yeah, I mean, those moments were really, really important to me. And so it was just like, kind of got addicted. It was like, how do I do more of this? So kind of in that same time was when I started doing more race photography. And the race photography was an interesting way to combine my own ultra running background. I've done a bunch of 100 miles, 100Ks, 50Ks with the photography, and to kind of use my ability to get into these remote areas to really tell these stories. And it was a really fun way for me to stay connected to the ultra running community, but not necessarily race, because I'd kind of burnt myself out from that. I'd struggled with some injuries, and it wasn't really something that I was feeling passionate about. So combining it with the photography was like a perfect marriage of the two things. So Broken Arrow, there's Broken Goat. Broken Arrow skyrunning race was a really fun one I did last summer. And I think it's one that a lot of us would really enjoy, because it's got more of a technical mountain skyrunning feel to it. And I mean, you can see here, they've got a ladder section, which is quite famous. They have to go up and over. And this is fun. So on the left, there's a couple of locals you might recognize, Janelle Hazlitt and Anne-Marie Madden. I think both of them spoke last week. And so it was really fun to like see them there and see them competing and be able to cheer them on, especially when you're somewhere like foreign, and just like still feel part of the community. And you're out in this incredible place. Like, I was running around the course all weekend, and yeah, it's just like honestly, it didn't feel like work at all. And then on the right, that's a screen grab from a short film that was done with Myrna Valerio. And I think that premiered at Banff, actually. And so as part of that weekend, I took the still images for that. So it's just kind of like all these cool little side stories and side projects emerged. And it's, you know, like I honestly couldn't look back and say, oh, there was one thing that kind of started the whole chain of reactions. But I think it was just that I said yes to everything, and was always just like looking for ways to put my hand up, kind of like the keen kid in class, you know, like, oh, I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it. So it's really kind of crazy to look back at the last few years now, and especially with all this time on our hands that we have with COVID, to really realize like what I crammed in, because it's honestly felt like such a whirlwind that I look at it now and I'm like, oh wow, that was a lot. And that's a cute one. I really enjoyed that. There's a lot of like fun personalities, and I really connect with people. So if I see someone that looks like they're struggling on course, like I'm the first person to give a high five and put my camera down and give someone a hug. And that's, I think, where my background with the ultra running comes into it, because you can really empathize and put yourself in someone's shoes. Or, you know, I'll occasionally heckle someone if I feel like they deserve that. So it's not all fun and games, not always nice. This is a fun one. So the Coastal Challenge is a stage race in Costa Rica, which I've photographed for the last 3 years. That was one of the first international events I started going to. And yeah, it's a favorite of mine. And that's not just because I get to go somewhere warm in February, although that doesn't hurt. It's a quite nice area to go, especially in the middle of winter. It's a stage race. It's 6 days. I think it's 235 kilometers over 6 days. And I never raced a stage race before. I've only ever done like 1 day or 2 day pushes, but, and honestly, like, I still don't know if I could do a stage race. I think it's really hard to get up and race every day and then take a break and let the DOM settle in and then race again. But I really have fallen in love with this race. And I think a lot of it is because the whole time you end up camping with everyone, which is unusual. Like, I know a lot of the European stage races, you'll stay in hotels and it's still fairly separate. You kind of go your own way in the evening and then you come back the next day and off you go again. But it's a different experience when you're racing all day and then you're showering with these like outdoor showers that are only cold ever. And you're setting up your tent and trying not to set it up on top of an anthill, which I have personally done several times. But it's just like this really cool and raw experience, and it's really funny to me, especially the last couple of years now that I've done it a few times. Like this year, I'm looking at everyone going into it, and you know, it's all these bright and fresh and showered faces, and you're just laughing to yourself because you're thinking, oh yeah, give it 2 or 3 days and then we'll talk, you know. And it's funny to see what people consider acceptable in the first few days versus what they're okay with in the last few days, and just watching like personal boundaries come down and people really get to know each other. I absolutely love that about ultra running, and I feel like stage races like this just kind of give you more time to flesh out those connections and relationships with people. So yeah, it's really a lot of fun. Like, I actually love this race. I just pulled together a few photos from it. One is from the opening ceremony, which is really cool. They do like a fire dance. And then, I mean, there's so much water. You're crossing water like every hour or two throughout the whole course. So going through a waterfall. And then I really like that moment on the bottom right there, just the very last finishing stage. You know, it kind of just captures the emotion. It's like you're crying, you're laughing, you don't know what you're doing, you know. But I feel like half the time when I'm taking those photos, I'm also like behind the camera going, I'm so happy for you. It's hard not to really get swept up and involved in people's stories. And a few more photos. So at bottom left, you might recognize Caitlin Gerben. She's a friend of mine. She's a really badass North American runner, and she won this year. So that was really fun to be down there and to see her crushing every day and to spend time with her in camp and be able to cheer her on course. So things like that are always, I always really love that. And the photo on the right, that guy is such a character. He's Costa Rican. He runs the race every year with his wife. He's always at the back of the pack. And unfortunately for him, on the second day, the last crossing that they do of one of the rivers is massively impacted by the tides. And so the back of the pack deals with like a really gnarly crossing with this rip tide coming through from the ocean and the river meeting. And it goes from being this like mellow kind of wading up to your thighs to this crazy thing. So they actually like string a rope across the river and they put a paddleboard over there, and then they have you lie on the paddleboard and they have someone on the other side of the river, and then they just haul and you just get whipped around in the river and you just try to hang on to the thing. So, I mean, I felt kind of badly because I probably could have been helping here instead of taking a photo, but it was a really good photo. Can't win them all. Again, a few more photos. This is just such a fun course. That top left one, there's this like really funny barbed wire fence that I discovered. There's quite a few photographers that cover this race, so a lot of times you're trying to find somewhere different to go to just have some space and to get away from the crowds. And so last year I wandered kind of through a ditch and down the road from the aid station, and I found this fence that everyone has to go through. And I thought, oh, this is fun, because people have choices. People can go over the fence or under the fence or through the fence. Let's see what they choose. And so I just sat there on the other side of the fence, kind of giggling as people got stuck. Like the people that went over would get a hamstring cramp or a hip flexor cramp, and the people that went under would get their pack stuck on the barbed wire. And I never helped, I just laughed. But it was, I really enjoyed those moments, and it was always kind of fun to find something that the other photographers weren't, and to capture a different perspective. And not every photo has to be that like glamorous, oh, I'm in perfect form racing down the hill and I've got the mountain behind me. Like I think sometimes the photos that you really treasure are those moments where someone catches you blowing a snot rocket, or catches you like doing something totally embarrassing or bizarre, because that's really more reflective of the ultra running experience, if we're all completely honest with ourselves. And then just a few more moments from the race. But yeah, I think the thing that I really search for through all of my race photography is just the chance to show people the je ne sais quoi factor of, you know, why people would do this thing. You know, like if I was to show a photo to someone that wasn't an ultra runner, would they be able to tell from that photo like what it was, or what that special, I don't know, I won't say magic, but addiction is that people come back for? Like, why would you run that sort of distance? So I'm always kind of asking myself that question when I'm out taking photos, and trying to find those moments that answer it, and just to like, yeah, just to present the full experience, not just the good moments, but sometimes the sad moments, and sometimes the moments of heartbreak. And, you know, I see a lot of that. Like I see moments where someone gets passed as they're thinking that they're like home free coming down the chute into the finish line, and then if someone sneaks by them at the last second, and like that's exciting for one person and devastating for another person, and both of those reactions are completely valid and interesting. So for me, it's like kind of being able to put myself in their shoes. I'm looking for like, where is that reaction, and like what are they feeling right now, and how can I tell that story? And this is another one. This is the last one from Costa Rica, but I really liked this one. This was this past February, right before COVID hit, and I was down in Central America again. And yeah, it's funny. There's like maybe 6 or 8 different photographers that cover this race, and they get really good photographers from Red Bull and Nat Geo and all sorts of different magazines. And I noticed that at night, everyone puts their cameras away and they go to the bar, they edit photos or whatever it is. And so I made a point this year to wander around the camp with my camera and really try to capture some of the quiet moments, because those are part of the race experience too. Like people may not be racing against the clock then, but that's very much part of their experience. So I thought this was a beautiful shot. It was on a really remote little peninsula towards the end of the race. I think it was the last night, just before the last day of the race. And the camp is on the right there in the palm trees, and it's just lighting up the beach. And yeah, just to me, it's like, I mean, I would go for this just as much as I would go for the epic race photos and all of that. So it's important to kind of look for those moments too, and not just put the camera away when the clock stops rolling. So I'm going to get to the 200 milers eventually, because that's what I want to chat mostly about. But I thought I'd just show a couple photos from Western States, because I was able to be down there last year. And I mean, anyone who's an ultra runner knows that's sort of the pinnacle of races. You know, I mean, there's Hard Rock, there's UTMB, but Western States has definitely got that like granddaddy factor of ultra running legacy. And it was really cool to be part of it and just to be in that atmosphere. It was especially crazy just like being on the other side of the finish line as these amazing athletes come down the chute, and just being part of the energy there. So that was personally for me a good moment. Oh, I thought you'd appreciate the photo on the right. That was a particularly well-timed moment, I thought. This poor guy peeked his guts out the finish line for like 10 minutes. So probably not the only person with a photo of him vomiting into a bucket, but it just kind of shows you how hard these athletes are pushing themselves. And it's, I don't know, I just think it's funny, let's be honest. And then, yeah, like there's lots of spectators on this course. There isn't always on ultra running courses, and we kind of forget like, oh wow, people are interested in this. They actually want to watch this. And Western States is one of those races where everybody turns out, and half the local town of Auburn is, you know, leading aid stations are involved somehow. And yeah, it's just such a great community, and it kind of is like ultra running community on steroids, you know. So it's very cool to be part of that. Top left, that's our very own local Kat Drew when she crushed Western States last year. So that was really fun to be part of again, and just to see how like solid she looked all day and to be able to cheer her on. I mean, I'm invested in everyone, but you're just a little bit more invested when it's someone that you know and you're friends with. And that was really, really special for me to see her do so well. And I know she worked so hard for that. And then Claire Gallagher in the bottom left that won. And yeah, this photo on the right I thought was interesting because the aid stations at Western States are not particularly photogenic. They're like just pavement, and a lot of them are in parking lots and whatever, like just not very scenic. So I struggled to find ways to make them interesting. And one of the most fun ones I found was to hang out by the buckets of water and the sponges that they had. It's funny now, you look at the photo and you're just like, oh, will we ever get to a point where we have communal sponges again? Oh my God. But anyways, it wasn't a thing last summer. And it was just really fun to have all the elites coming through, and most of them would stop for sponges over the head, and it was always entertaining. So I personally love those shots. I would kind of get my camera, I would lie on the ground right by the bucket, and then I would shoot up towards their faces as they got the sponges put over their head and try not to get too soaked, which in hindsight is probably disgusting. And I probably got a lot of like third-hand sweat all over myself from that. But you know, anything for the photo. Builds the immune system. Okay, so that's kind of the end of my little like overview of various races and highlights from the last few years. And I thought I'd spend a little bit more time going into the 200 milers, which I had the privilege of being part of last year, and just like chat about the logistics of that. Because to me, I'd never covered anything quite so massive, and 200 miles is a lot of distance to cover, as I'm sure you can appreciate. So it never occurred to me how much work it was going to be just to get around the course. And that certainly, I don't know if people realize all the behind the scenes that happens there. So anyways, this photo is from the finish line of Bigfoot 200. And it's a funny little story because this guy, I think he's from like Czech Republic or something. And he had like an Eastern European accent. And the story was that he and his friend had signed up for the Gobi Desert Marathon, which was supposed to have been the week before, I believe, something like that. You can fact check me later. But the race got canceled. And so spur of the minute, last minute decision, he booked a ticket to Washington, to the Cascade Mountains, and decided to run this 200-mile race in the Cascades, which for anyone that's familiar with that area knows that is not the same as the Gobi Desert at all. And anyways, the first time I saw him out on course, I was cheering everybody on and like, yay, good job, blah, blah, blah. And he looks at me and he's like, I hate mountains. And I was like, oh, ha, 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 that's funny. And, you know, you're just kind of like, what do I say to that? You're on day one of this, buddy. And I thought, well, maybe he's just having a bad day, whatever. So I saw him again the next day and I'm like, yay, good job, you're doing great. I hate mountains. And I'm like, oh my God, you are in the wrong race. And I didn't know the whole story about his last minute sign up. I just saw this guy that really hated mountains trying to do this very mountainous race. It was just hilarious. So I didn't think too much about it. And as we got to the end of the race, apparently what happened is he went into the last aid station ahead of the checkout, ahead of the cutoff time, and they kicked him out ahead of cutoff. And I guess he decided he was going to give up, like he was just done. And so he crawled into the woods just off the trail and took a nap. And I guess he took quite a long nap because the sweepers were coming up the trail, clearing out the course. And I was actually coming out from the last summit, which I'll get into more later. And we all ran into each other and they'd found him napping in the bushes and they were trying to convince him to finish the race because he had like, I don't know, 30K left or something like that, which after you run 200 miles is like what's 30K? You know, you're gonna finish. So these sweepers were just like, bless their hearts, they were so intent on him finishing. They were literally sweeping him down the trail. Like if you picture someone like literally like pushing you down the trail, and he was just protesting the whole way. He was like so fed up. So I just shook my head and I went to the finish line and got there and heard there was one more runner out on course that we were waiting for. And I was like, oh my God, it's that guy. He's still out there. And sure enough, the sweepers had like swept him down the trail and onto the road. And then they have to run like 20K on the road to get into town. And one of his buddies hopped in a car and ended up like driving alongside him, playing like Eye of the Tiger and then some heavy metal and stuff into the finish shoot with like less than 30 minutes to spare. And we were all by that point just like biting our nails waiting for him to come in, because you don't want to see someone finish like right after the cutoff. That would be just horrific. And this guy comes in, and I mean, I don't think he was saying he hated mountains then, but he's just like the funniest, quirkiest racer I've ever seen. But to his credit, he pulled off a 200 miler that he did not train for in terrain that he did not train for, with a not particularly cheerful attitude. And I heard that he might be coming back to race one of the other ones again, actually. So I guess he's a glutton for punishment. But anyways, that was just like a really funny moment from the race, and thought I'd start with that. Just a couple photos from various parts of these courses. So for anyone that's not familiar, there's 3 200 milers. There's Bigfoot 200, which is in Washington. There's the Tahoe 200, which is in California. And then there's the Moab 240, which is in fact a bonus 40 miles. And that is in Utah in October. And there are crazy people that actually do all 3 in one summer, and they call them the Triple Crowners. And those are the people that you really get to know over the course of the summer. So I really enjoyed kind of seeing their journeys, and you really get invested in them. I mean, you get invested in everybody, because when you see them for 5 days straight, then you feel like you're all out there together, but those people are particularly insane. So there's just a couple shots of the different courses. As you can see, it's not exactly easy terrain. In Bigfoot, I think there was a section where they crossed like 12 streams in a row. So, I mean, if your feet look as good as the ones on the right, then you're probably doing really well, because there was a lot of very soggy feet. This was a fun little photo from Snow Valley Peak, just because it's an example of how, as a race photographer at these races, you end up sitting out in the middle of nowhere for very long periods of time trying to catch everyone, because by like day 3, there's such a gap between the beginning of the pack and the back of the pack. And it's like you're just waiting there for maybe 45 minutes or an hour at a time for someone to pass by. And I'll get into it a little bit more, but everyone has like a GPS tracker on them, so you can see on a topo map where everyone is. So you have an idea of where the racers are, but like there's no getting around it. If you want to see people, you're going to sit there for a long time. And this is like one of the highlights, like stunning view of Tahoe in the background, and some other lake that I can't remember. Emerald Lake or something like that. I don't know. Scott can correct me later. Anyways, I was up there for maybe 12 hours and it was so windy. You can kind of see it in the trees on the far right there. And I was just being blown around. And I ended up like hiding behind these groups of rocks so that I could see the runners as they came up this hill towards me. And then at the very last second, I would like race out onto the trail in front of them and try to get into position to take this photo. And then I would run back to my little hiding spot and try to like, yeah, I would try to take cover. Marlet Lake. Scott just corrected me. Thank you. I knew I wasn't even close, was I? Fuck. You'd think I'd know it. I sat in front of it for long enough. Anyways, so it's just an example of like how hard these races are to cover. Like you can sit out there for 12 hours and see a third of the pack because you've missed the front people and the back of the pack are going to come through when it's dark. So you're really just trying to maximize your daylight hours and like plan to be in the most beautiful places that you can at the right times, and then hopefully have runners come through. And if that all lines up, you get a good shot. But these girls were fun. They ran in tutus the whole time, and I don't know how they did not chafe, because that looks like chafing. And as always, like I really try to find some of the quieter moments. These were from aid stations. The one on the right is Mike McKnight, finishing Moab 240. He won all 3 races this summer. And it was just like a stunning display of athleticism. Like he slept for maybe 10 or 15 minutes at a time in like, or even cumulative during these races. Like he just didn't stop. And his whole family was there. His wife was pregnant with their 2nd kid. Like they're just like quite the family. And it was really emotional seeing him finish. He worked so hard for that. And just so interesting because like his experience at the front of the pack, he's finishing these races in about 3 days without sleeping. And then there's people that like strategically maximize their sleep time throughout the race. So they're just squeaking in under the cutoff, but they know that because they're like very well planned out as to when they have to be out of each aid station, but they're more seeing it as like a big adventure run as opposed to a race. So the contrast between Mike and the last place person, like there could be 30 hours between when he finishes and between when the last person finishes, which again makes it such a logistical nightmare to try to cover these courses. And that one on the bottom left, I just thought that was adorable. I think they were Swedish, but this guy had his whole family there, and his daughter was particularly invested in his like care, and she had baby wipes and she's wiping his face and his feet, and you know he's trying to have a nap and she's just like, oh, so cute, just like whatever he needed, she was just like idolizing him. So I thought that was a really sweet moment. Okay, so I thought I'd spend a few minutes just chatting about like how we do this stuff. And I would be very remiss if I didn't chat about the team, because it's certainly not just me out there. There was 3 of us covering these races. So on the left there is Howie Stern, whom you might have seen at various races. And on the right is Scott Rokas, who you also might have seen at various races, especially if you race down in the States. And the 2 of them have covered the 200 milers pretty much exclusively for the last 5 to 6 years, depending on the race. I think that's how long they've been around for. And this year was the first year that they brought on a 3rd photographer because the races have grown a lot and it's just impossible to cover the course. You know, like even if you're not sleeping, you're never going to get to see everywhere on the course or to catch all the runners. So Scott approached me this year, and Candace brought me on to be the 3rd part of the team. And that's interesting too, because you don't often work with other photographers in this industry. Like a lot of times you're the only one. And so you just kind of decide where you're going to go during a race and that's where you go. But the cool thing about this is that Scott's built up this like database over the last 5 years of doing these races and kept meticulous notes on like when people have come through different parts of the race and really gotten a sense of like how to break the race up and when to expect runners in different places. And he's also built out these like maps on Gaia. So coming into the races, I felt actually really well prepared, considering I didn't have time to get out on the courses and really get familiar with them. I was able to use these maps that he had and kind of hone in on areas, and then we could figure out exactly when the runners would be going through different sections of the course, and then we could plan out who was going to be where. And so that's really, it became strategic. Like you don't want all of us to end up in the same place getting the same shot. So it would be like, okay, well, someone's going to go to this point and stay there for 12 hours or so. And then someone else is going to go to this aid station and try to catch some of the action there. And then someone else is going to leapfrog them, catch a few hours of sleep, and then get out on trail and like hike against the grain to see people as they're coming into an aid station or whatever. It's just like so much work. And especially when you have 200 miles, like you can see the course, it's huge. And you just never sleep during these races, basically. It's impossible. So yeah, I don't think I really realized that part of it when I went into it, because I've only ever shot races that were either stage races where I got to sleep at night, or you know, where I shot a race that was like a civilized length of time and ended at a civilized time. So this was like an ultra marathon in and of itself for us. And I mean, I would cover like 80, probably around 80 kilometers average per race with all my photography gear on my back, like 40 pounds of gear. Often I'd have camping gear with me because I'd be out there for an overnighter or something like that. You're dealing with weather, like Bigfoot, we got a crazy lightning storm, literally insane, like to the point where even in a van with rubber tires, we were too afraid to be up on the ridges because it was just striking all around us, and runners were taking cover, and it was just absolute chaos. And like these races are in big areas and very remote areas, and it's like more than a race. It's kind of a survival thing, and things happen, and it really does remind you, like, it's, you know, nature doesn't care that you're doing your little circle of the lake. Like, nature's going to do what it wants to do. So, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I really like the physical aspect of covering these races, and just how hard it is sometimes to get around and to get these moments. And the first thing we always said to the racers at the briefings was, like, if you see us, don't expect to be close to an aid station, because we're probably out in the middle of nowhere. So don't get your hopes up high. Yeah, it's very true. This is a fun little photo that Scott and I took together because it wouldn't stop raining for the first few days at Bigfoot, and we kept getting skunked out of our views. And it was just one of these experiences where, like, we were in front of Mount St. Helens, but you couldn't see Mount St. Helens because it was totally socked in, and we were just frustrated. And so we grabbed a bunch of his lighting gear and decided to just, like, make something. So this is just a random meadow outside of the aid station, and Scott put up these colored lights, and we would kind of just wait in the dark until people came down, and then yell at them, like, watch for the lights, you know, because they're all hallucinating and totally overstimulated and tired. And then I would take the photos as they came through, and they would be blind, and it was a good time. But I point this moment out because sometimes as a race photographer, you just don't get the ideal conditions, and you really do have to get creative and to find ways to, like, maximize what you do have. And sometimes that's literally making the moment happen. And I thought these ended up being really fun photos. So there you go. All right, so just as an example for, like, how nature can impact these races, I thought I'd chat about the storm that happened at Tahoe 200 this year. I was all excited to be down in California because it's warm and sunny in September, and I wasn't expecting it to snow in the middle of the race, but it did. And it ended up being this just crazy experience to be part of. It just, yeah, we were on, I think, day 5 of the race, and racers were coming into the last section, and we kept hearing it's going to snow, but it was like bluebird skies. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to snow. And then in about a matter of an hour, all of a sudden, the whole sky just went gray, and the wind picked up, and all of a sudden it was like, shit, it's going to snow. Okay. And so the aid station was, like, battening down the hatches, and there's runners out on top of peaks everywhere. And a lot of them had mandatory rain gear and stuff, but they had it in drop bags and not necessarily with them, because it had been, like, bluebird skies and, like, tank top weather the whole race. So they're not carrying their Gore-Tex necessarily, which, as I'm sure they all learned from this experience, you probably still want to have some of that stuff with you, even if it doesn't look like it's going to rain or snow. So anyways, this is one of my favorite moments from that storm. This is Dennis Marchant from Vancouver. I'm kind of like picking on all the Vancouver runners I know. And he looks about as happy as I felt about there being snow in California. He was just absolutely destroyed. This is him coming into the aid station. I think he had his parents there as crew, and he just couldn't stop shaking. He couldn't get his mouth to stop chattering, and he's looking at me for the photo, and he told me later that he didn't even see me. Like, he had no idea I was there. And we're both just out there shivering, looking at each other like, what the hell? So yeah, sorry, Dennis, but this is one of my favorite moments. And I really think it captures just the, like, the shit that can go wrong in ultra running, right? And sometimes you have all the best laid plans, and he was having a great race, and then all of a sudden something like this strikes, and that's a windbreaker. It's not a waterproof jacket, and he got soaked because it was like slush before it was snow, and then he couldn't get warm, and it goes sideways fast. So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from that whole experience, just watching everyone dealing with that. So anyways, I initially didn't want to go out into the storm because I was like, this is miserable, this sucks. And then I thought, well, yeah, but your philosophy is when the going gets tough, you get your ass out there. And I mean, that is where the best photos are. So I kind of was like, well, suck it up, buttercup, out you go. And I went up to the top of the last summit, which racers hit at about 200 miles, because Tahoe 200 is actually 205 miles long. And I decided I'd wait up there and try to get a shot of everyone coming through this crazy storm. And as I was heading up there, I followed this wonderful set of fresh cougar tracks all the way up to the top. And I was like, oh, good. I'm so happy. I know those are there. So I have that in the back of my head. And then I'm sitting up there, and I'm sitting up there. And the screenshot was from the tracking website. And that's all the racers sitting in the aid station below me, refusing to come up and over the summit. And for about 3 hours during the middle of the storm, not one single racer came up there. So I was just sitting there and just like teeth chattering. I was doing jumping jacks. I was yelling at the cougar to go away. I was just like, you know, bored out of my mind and also very, very cold, watching these dots just not move. Like, I'm not going to repeat the thoughts I was thinking about everyone in the aid station, but I certainly don't blame them for being there and warming up. It was just like quite funny because I was sitting up there trying to get these epic moments, and all the racers were like, yeah, we're not going out in that. We're just going to stay here for a bit longer. So that was an example of my plans not quite working out the way I wanted them to. But eventually people did start to emerge. This was the first guy. Love him, bless his heart. He emerged from the aid station and I could see him on the tracker just coming up towards me, and I was like, go buddy, go. I was so excited to see him. So I made him give me a high five there, and then we took a selfie together. We had a moment. It was just like friends, people. But yeah, it really does feel by that point like you're all invested. And he comes around the corner and he's like, what? There's someone up here? Like, how long have you been here for? And it's like, you just feel like you're all in it together. And this was just so bizarre. Like, it was honestly bluebird skies just hours before. So I don't think any of us really believed that we were out here in this storm. This was awesome. So after I was up there for about 8 or 9 hours, the sunset, quote unquote, was happening, and I realized I wasn't going to get one. I was kind of hoping for like a magical break in the clouds, and like, didn't happen. So anyways, I started heading back down to get a bit of sleep and to thaw out, because I figured I'd come back up for sunrise to the same location. And came around the corner, and this was a pacer for one of the racers, and I guess he lives in the area, and when he saw that it was snowing, he ran home and dug out his Santa costume. So this ended up being a really fun photo, and just like, I love these moments, you know, you can't make this up. Yeah, right place, right time, thank you. Eventually, something worked out. So yeah, I went and thawed out for a little bit, and then I set my alarm for like 4 o'clock, and I could see these two guys on the tracker. They'd left the aid station, and I was like, those are my sunrise guinea pigs, those are mine. And I kind of hiked up with them for a little bit, and then I ran ahead because I really wanted to get some photos. And I mean, amazingly, the skies had cleared, and it was like just gorgeous, like fresh snow on the ground and like little glimmers of light in the trees. And you know, when you're like getting higher and higher in the trees and you're just trying to brace the sun as best you can. So I got up there ahead of them, and I thought, man, that's a really cool lookout. I wonder if I can convince them to go over there. And of course, convincing someone to go off trail during a 200-miler is just cruel. Like, they're not going to want to take one step extra. And I convinced them to get like 30 feet off the trail and over to this little rock. And I was like, it'll be worth it. I promise it'll be worth it. And I felt like I deserved it. Like the universe owed that to me for the day before. So anyways, they were absolute sweethearts, and they went over there and, you know, like, woohoo, took the photo. And I think they actually loved that moment. And so the photo of them going up to the summit actually ended up being the cover of the November issue of Ultra Running magazine. So that was really special when I actually got the chance to tell them that, and to like, yeah, they were really, really stoked about that. Just kind of, yeah, one of those moments where everything finally lined up, and you know, you win some, you lose some, but this was definitely a win. And those guys were so cute. Like, they wanted me to sign their copies of the magazine, and I think it like totally made their year. And that was also my first magazine cover, so that made my year. So yeah, just one of those things where like persistence pays off. And I love the story behind that photo, and I was really excited that they chose that. So yeah, that was that. And then last little story before I wrap up. This photo recently won an award at the event photography competition, which I was really excited about. And I called it Summit Selfies, because it was a selfie that I took from the last summit of the Bigfoot 200. And I'd gone up there to try to catch all the racers coming through. And I was like, I'll just stay up here for 24 hours and literally see everybody. So I I had my sleeping bag, I had like a sleeping mat, and I was going to bivvy, which I'd never done. Like I've only ever camped, and bivvying is like a whole nother level of you're really out there in the middle of the mountains. And so I was really proud of myself. I felt very self-sufficient. I had my dehydrated food. I took a little nap. Although it was funny because I was like trying to nap just off the trail, and these racers, I guess, thought that I was a runner that was down, and they started yelling at me like, hello, are you okay? And in my head, I was like, just fucking go away. I just closed my eyes. Anyways, I think I took like a 15-minute nap in like a 48-hour period of time. But it was cool as there was a full moon that night, so I couldn't see all the stars. And it was cool, like people were coming up and I had these really amazing exchanges and everyone was so stoked to see me up there. I think it was just like a really big boost before they headed down to civilization again to have that company. And then the full moon set at about 4 o'clock and all of a sudden it was just like stars everywhere. And then of course there's no runners. And I looked at the tracker and there was like nobody that was going to come up there for the next hour and a half. And I was like, fuck, it's perfect, please. So I thought, you know what, I'm just going to take the photo myself. So I put my camera on a tripod and put it on like a 30-second interval timer, focused on that rock there. And then I just like booked it out there and stood there and like looked up at the sky. And yeah, Scott just saying in the comments there, I got the very first like smoke-free clear evening from that summit that anyone had gotten. And I know that Scott knew that was possible. He knew there was potential there. And so I was pretty stoked when I was able to come down and show those guys the images from there. So that was like the reward for all the lightning storms and the rain earlier in that race was this night. And it was just like 360-degree views in all directions. And this photo, which ended up, yeah, getting this award, and just like a really cool moment, honestly, it just like kind of came together. And that was from the sunrise the following moment. So I know you've never seen that view, Scott, but that's the view when it is clear up there. It's beautiful. It's called Ellis Peak if anyone's in the area, and you can see Mount Rainier, Mount Adams, and Mount St. Helens, all from the same just panorama. And I got like stunning, beautiful sunrise shots of all three of those, which someday I'll put together and print out in my spare time. But it was just like one of those spots. And again, there was no runners for sunrise, which was funny because like I would have loved to put a runner in that scene, but instead you get a happy little shot of Rainier. That's the way it goes. So yeah, that's kind of the moral of the story with the 200 milers is just that there's so many logistics that go into those things and it's really hard to plan for them. And sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't, but you have to make your own luck. And I think the thing that I really enjoy about it and hope to continue doing is that I mean, it's really up to you to create that experience and to get something out of it that's true to the moment, whatever that is, right? And like, I can't go back there next year with the same expectations of getting the same view or the same weather or whatever. Like, it's different every time. So you have to kind of reset that expectation in your mind and go into it with fresh eyes and find something new. So yeah, it hasn't gotten boring yet. And I hope that I get to do more of it again. That's all I got for my presentation, and I think we have a few minutes for questions.
That was awesome, Hilary. Beautiful images. Congratulations on that award as well. I've got some questions, but in the meantime, feel free everybody to post your questions in the Q&A window, and we'll get to those as well. Or you can post them right in that Zoom webinar chat window. Either way. Hilary, I'm curious about, you mentioned some of the challenges that you face. Waiting around sometimes for runners just to show up, right, in between, especially in those 200 milers. Weather obviously is an issue. Shooting at night, especially in the weather, is an issue. Have you ever had any experiences where you just had a total bust, like where just gear failures or just weather that just completely, you pretty much got like nothing from a race,
Yeah.
Does that happen?
There are no photos of that in this presentation.
Why?
No, I mean, actually, yeah, I can think of a race. The first race I shot with Scott was Canyons 100K. And I think I took the worst photos of my life of that race because it was just like a dry, dusty canyon. There was nothing. It was hard light all day. Everyone was backlit, so their faces were shadowed from their baseball hats. And I remember turning in those photos at the end of the race and thinking, that's it. I'm never going to shoot one of these again. I'm done. My career is done. Like, it was just so bad. But and I mean, certainly with Bigfoot earlier in the race, like we had 3 days of rain where every single shot was just the same because it was just like Pacific Northwest doom and gloom. And I mean, that's why that moment stood out to me with all the lights and setting everything up. It's just like, you can find ways to get around it. It's just a lot more work and really nice when the sun comes out and everything cooperates.
And is that the difference with the longer race too, where, you know, chances are at some point the weather will improve? Like it's like give it a few hours, it'll get better or possibly worse. But at least at least it's not like a 5-hour race, right?
I totally enjoy that about the 200 milers, and I think that's why I go back to them again. Is because you have 5 days to create something, and really it's like an arc, you know. And somewhere in that arc, you might get that sweet spot, like that's your, and it could be on day one, and you get shit after that, or it could be right at the end, like the Bigfoot one was like the 11th hour of the last day, you know? So yeah, it's kind of like a bit of a game. I like that part of it.
Building on that, Jeff asks, when you're sitting there for 4 to 6 hours, do you spend time experimenting in the meantime? And you know, like just whether it be just personal shots, and I'd actually maybe add on to that, are you also testing out shots so that when the runners come through, you know, you've got your focus nailed? And, you know, so what are you doing with that time?
I'd like to say that I'm philosophizing and learning and creating. Sometimes I'm just sitting there on my ass, just like enjoying not doing anything, or eating, or trying to close my eyes, or like on Instagram, if there's, you know, like cell coverage, because some of the courses, Bigfoot had no cell phone coverage, so that's its own challenge, but Tahoe had all the cell phone coverage. So it's like, yeah, sometimes you're just wanting to veg because you're on the whole time. Like we rarely would turn off for a couple hours. So but a lot of times I'd get out to a spot and I'd get the perfect shot and everything set up, and then the weather would change and the light would change, and all of a sudden that shot was horrible, and that was all before someone had come through. So then I'd have to go and like find somewhere new and like recreate the whole setup, and then hope someone would come through while the light was good, and then probably have to change again. So yeah, there's definitely, like, it's evolving, and like the sun is always moving, so you can sit in the same place for 12 hours but you're not getting the same shot for more than like half an hour. So it's fun but frustrating sometimes when it's perfect. You're like, just stay there for a while. Let's get everyone their calendar shot, but it doesn't work like that.
We've got 2 more questions that maybe I can combine here from Scott and from Robbie. So how is your work, your travel photography? So particularly those 2 trips you did to Nepal, which seems like they really created a lot of growth for you as an artist. How has that now impacted your trail running photography? And do you have a preference between the two, between the travel-based stuff and the race-based stuff?
Yeah, those are good questions. I mean, I would say last year I definitely did more race photography than traveling. Just it happened that way and my schedule got busy. This year my goal was actually to go back to more travel photography. I had trips lined up to Mongolia and some cool places, and none of that is happening. But because there is a difference, and like in a race you're quite limited as far as what you can get. Like you saw, there's so many times when there's a beautiful moment but there's no one there, or someone comes through and they're so tired they just don't want to run. They're just going to slog through the photo, and so you don't get a good photo even if everything else is perfect. So it's nice with the travel photography because you can kind of take more time and really set up those moments and plan ahead for them and actually create them. And in race photography it feels more like it's reactionary, and then in the travel photography you can kind of be ahead of it and like see what you want, but then have the luxury of time to pull it together. So yeah, I would say the race photography is its own satisfaction when everything lines up, but a lot of that is luck, rather than, you can only plan so much, right? So I certainly enjoy both. I think probably somewhere in the like 60-40 balance is right. I'm not sure which one. But yeah, they both have their own merits.
Different challenges.
Yeah.
What's the process like after the race, and how many photos do you deliver typically? And I'd like to actually hear as well about those. You mentioned this, but you didn't elaborate, but I know you and I have talked about this, stage races, where you're processing in the evening and then you're back at it in the morning. So maybe you can talk both about the one-off races, like the 24-hour races, and then a multi-day race, what that post-production process is like.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So for Coastal Challenge, for example, I might take anywhere from 1,200 to 3,000 photos a day. And then they want photos for social media that night, right? Because it's all very instant nowadays. So as soon as everyone's in, I'm on my computer, and I'm in my head, I've kind of made a note of like, these are the good ones. So I'm trying to get through them as fast as possible and deliver 10 or 15 images that they can post for the day. And then I'll usually just spend the next few hours editing and culling, because if I don't do it then, I'm going to have to do it later. So you're constantly trying to stay on top of it. Even when I'm out on course, like if I have lulls in between runners, you can rate things in your camera. So I'll be rating so that as soon as I import them all onto my laptop, they all filter up and I can kind of get through them faster. And that's something I've developed over the years. I was not that smart when I first started. But like after a week of Coastal Challenge, I might have like 10,000 photos to get through. So you have to have some sort of system. And then for the 200s, Candace wanted like the same sort of instant coverage. The biggest problem was that we often didn't have cell phone coverage when we're out on course. So we would have to drive. Like in the case of Bigfoot, there was a couple times where we'd have to drive an hour off the course just to get service so that we could send photos through to post. Which becomes its own challenge, and it's like a totally separate thing from the race photography, is the logistics of also trying to manage social media and keep it exciting for everyone that's watching. And now there's like Facebook Live videos, so you're trying to do that whenever you have a break in runners, and it's fun, but at the same time you kind of feel like you're wearing so many different hats. But yeah, certainly during the 200-mile races, it's more just like you're trying to pick out 5 or 6 photos every day and then just try to find cell phone coverage to get them out and keep going. And yeah, during the stage races, you have a little bit more time at night, but you're also exhausted and you're going to bed at midnight and you're getting up at 3 every morning. So it's like sleep now versus sleep later.
Hilary, I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
With race photos primarily, it seems like, or it kind of sounds like you're mostly kind of setting up a shot and like waiting for people to come through it and then trying to take advantage of that. But in kind of the more adventure type stuff, I'm curious how much you're like shooting from the hip versus doing that similar kind of setting things up and taking the time to like make a shot, I guess.
Most of the time when I'm doing adventure photography, I'm shooting from the hip. Like I've got a clip on my backpack strap on the shoulder. You could see it in that first photo of Nepal, and my camera just sits there so that I can get it out and also put it away to use my hands if I'm climbing something or scrambling. But a lot of that is very opportunistic. Sometimes if I see something that's like magical and we're staying somewhere, then it might be like, well, let's go back and time it so that we get the right light instead of, 12 o'clock harsh sunlight. And a lot of times we'll choose to do like a sunrise thing or a sunset thing so that your chances of the light are gorgeous. But when you have the big long days, like we did some scrambles that were just huge days, like 15, 16-hour days, and you're just shooting whatever you get. I'm not even looking at what I'm taking. I'm just like trying to survive. I'm also probably like one hand is hanging on to like a 5-3 hold and I'm shooting and I'm trying not to drop my lens like halfway down this giant cliff and then get it back on my backpack so that I can keep climbing and keep up. Because that's the other part too, is like you don't want to slow the group down, especially when you're on these like efficient mountain trips. So you're always weighing the like, is the shot worth the extra work it's going to take me to catch up again? You feel like a rabbit. You're always like, choo, 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 so I've definitely gotten more selective. I think a few years ago, I would have put myself through a lot more of the like sprinting to catch up. And now I'm like a little choosier about the moments. But sometimes you just hit somewhere that's so epic and so gorgeous, and then I get really excited and run around a lot. So
yeah, that was going to be kind of my follow-up question was, what are the kind of things you're thinking about when you're shooting from the hip like that? And are you always trying to stay ahead and kind of be lined up if something happens, or are you hanging back to watch people go through it? Or what are the keys there?
A little bit of both. Sometimes if I see something where I can see that the backdrop is absolutely insane, then I will like run ahead to try to get that shot. Other times I'll just take it from like in the group or from behind them if I'm slow and I'm struggling to keep up. And if I see something that's really epic, I'll kind of ask everyone, like, can you hold on for 2 seconds so I can run ahead and get in front of you? I've learned to admit weakness a little bit more, and it is a team effort and everyone appreciates the photos. So, it's definitely a balance, especially when you're on some of the more technical things, like stuff at 20,000 feet in the Himalayas is just physically challenging, regardless of whether you're carrying the camera gear and doing all that stuff. And half the time I'm struggling to breathe and I'm really cold and I can barely feel the shutter and my hands are too cold to adjust the settings. So whatever I'm shooting at is good enough. And like some of those shots, you're just like, hoping for the best, but also like fully in the experience. Like no one's dropping you by helicopter into these places. Like you're hauling ass to get there. And so I think for me, that's the challenge and the reward of it. And then when you can get a good photo out of it, but there's certainly photos that I think I nailed, and then I looked at them later and I'm like, wow, I focused on that rock. That's really great. You know, like totally botched the shot. But yeah, that's kind of the part of it, right? Like you don't want everything to be a stage shoot. You're going to miss a lot of those cool moments that people really relate to.
Totally. One last question that I had, like, I know you obviously travel a ton, and like races and just going to cool places is like a huge part of your photography. So like that kind of obvious question is, what are you going to do this year? You know, how are you going to adapt that's not an option?
Well, I don't know if you've seen my Instagram lately, but I've been doing this fun series called Apartment Art, where I've been photoshopping myself into places from my apartment that are way more exciting than where I am right now. Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like I had the whole year lined up. I was booked until November. Obviously, all of that has had to like take a backseat in a huge way. It's been a struggle. I've definitely leaned into the graphic design side of my background more and picked up some work there in the last little while. And it is forcing me to kind of step back and look at how much travel I do and what that's going to look like in the future. And I don't have an answer yet, but I think it's going to be a combination of like trying to get back to some of that and also appreciating that there's lots I can explore in BC, and maybe I should do some more exploring close to home. Like we are so lucky to live here, and I feel like even more grateful for that, you know? So yeah, just trying to kind of adapt and trying to take what I can out of it. And I mean, we're all struggling to know where it's going, and it's kind of, there's a lot of unknown, but yeah, if I can get back to the traveling and races, I'd love to, but I'm certainly like trying to look at it positively and see what else I can find in the meantime. And yeah, life's still great.
I've been enjoying your apartment art series, Hilary. And I think like, you know, with art, often like constraints are what make good art, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you've been given these constraints, and it's been interesting to see you grow within that box. And it seems, I suspect you'll come out of that having learned and grown as an artist in a way that you maybe wouldn't have had you kept, you know, shooting the same thing. And then you'll apply that into your other photography possibly.
Totally. It's kind of opened a few doors. And yeah, it's playful, it's fun. And so I think it will be something that I take forward. So yeah, there's always a silver lining.
But that aside, so, you know, thinking ahead in a few years, let's assume we get back to some kind of new normal. What are your goals? What are your long-term goals as an artist, as a photographer? Do you have a bucket list? I mean, you've had at least one, I know, if not several cover shots. So are there goal races? Are there events? Are there big trips where, you know, in the next decade, you'd love to get, you know, what are your top 3 to 5?
Well, those are great existential questions that I've been asking myself a lot lately. I think where I'd like to go next is telling stories, kind of back to the Nepal roots where I started with this adventure stuff, where I really like seek out these places in the world that are kind of forgotten or a little bit more remote, or there's a couple of like all female climbing expedition teams that I was trying to put together, telling those sorts of stories and just finding ways to bring diversity to some of these sports, because like as a female photographer, I don't see a ton of that sometimes, and it's still a very male dominated world. So if I can find a way to help enable other like female explorers and adventurers and put together content, and not necessarily all like raw girls only, but just like find ways to like bring and enable more people to get into the stuff by making it more relatable, whatever way that looks like, right? And there's so many people with amazing stories of how they've overcome things to be where they are. And I think I'm really interested in telling that so that we get the full picture of like, you don't have to be an elite athlete to do this stuff. You can be positively like back of the pack and still get out on these adventures. So I think that's where I'm kind of drawn to, is just like the human factor and trying to make it so that other people can get out here. Cause like, I mean, 10 years ago, I was sitting in an office. I was not active. I couldn't run 5K. And like, it's crazy to see where my life has gone in the last 10 years. And so I really have a passion for helping other people find that too. So that's where I'd like to go. So if you know anyone.
How can, do you have a last slide with your handles and stuff? What's the best way people can find you and check out your work? You're on Instagram.
Yeah. TheHilaryAnn.com. And that's the same for Instagram, the Hilary Ann. You can find me. If you, just maybe send Jeff an email if you can't find me, but like should be pretty easy too. hopefully.
I'll
But
post.
yeah,
I'm gonna post your handle right now in
Okay.
the
You're the best.
chat.
Thanks.
Just so that you guys can all go there right away.
Yeah, and my website's linked to my Instagram, so you can find me there. But like, send me messages if you have any questions. If you want to get more technical, I'll geek out about camera stuff any day. Like, shoot me a message. I have time, so yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Hilary. That was great.
Thanks, Larry.